Heavy spoilers for Clair Obscur Expedition 33 ahead. Clair Obscur is a game with some interesting things to say about identity. Many of the characters in Clair Obscur have multiple representations within the world. There's the real version of them, and then the perception of them, manifested as a physical character within the world, or several different perceptions of them, each created by a different person. Take, for example, the paintress. The true paintress, Aline Dessendre, sits mourning the death of her son at the top of the monolith that can be seen from every corner of the world of the canvas. The entity who is perceived as the paintress, though, is a giantess that sits grieving in front of that monolith, who rises to paint a new number every year. The giant form of the paintress was created by Aline, and so it is fair to say that it is a representation of how she sees herself. The giant paintress is grey and gloomy, exuding a deep sadness, powerful enough to cover the entire world in a state of melancholy. However, Aline's husband, Renoir, who is at odds with her throughout the entire game, has painted his own representation of her. Renoir's creations, called axons, are more abstract than Aline's, but we are told directly in the dungeon The Reacher that everything Renoir paints is to a purpose. Every element of his art suggests some meaning.
Papa and his parables.
Parables?
He never paints just to paint. Everything has to have layers and layers of meaning and purpose. Everything's a lesson.
Renoir's version of his wife, known as Cyrene, is beautiful, joyous, and dances hypnotically, so what we have here is a complicated love story suggested through how characters represent each other in their art. Aline created a version of herself that is monstrous because she believes that her grief has made her monstrous, and has stolen her reason to live away from her. Her representation of Renoir is described as cold and callous because that is how she views her husband's attempts to pull her away from the canvas, refusing to leave her alone to die in her grief. Despite this, Renoir still created Cyrene to represent her, a creature of such stunning beauty that her dance entrances those around her. Cyrene is the creation of a man who is deeply in love with Aline, even when she does not see herself as deserving of that love or capable of returning it. Even at her worst, Renoir still loves his wife very deeply. All art reflects the artist's lens, their perspective on the world. That means that the same painting by two different artists will have a completely different result. None of these perspectives on their own are perfect reflections of the subject, but each reveals different aspects of it. Because Clair Obscur is set within a magical canvas and is about a family of magical painters, the game uses this idea of the artist's lens to explore how its characters are viewed by each other and by themselves. Who are these characters, really? Who do they believe themselves to be, and who do others believe them to be? Each of the Dessendre children struggle with a different problem related to identity. Today, that's what I want to talk about. How Clair Obscur explores the idea of identity through representation. How Clair Obscur asks who you really are and how you are defined. If you believe yourself to be a saint, then what is the value in the perspective of those who see you as a sinner? Which is more true? The mask you wear in front of others, or the mask you wear in front of yourself? But before we get into the meat of today's video, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep recently provided me with their Manta Pro Sleep Mask and Manta Cool Eye Cups just in time for summer, and I absolutely love them. This time of year, the days get longer and brighter, and that can make getting a good night's sleep harder, especially if you live in the deserts of the American Southwest, like I do. The mask is adjustable, so it fits comfortably, no matter the size and shape of your head, and it feels very high quality. It's great at blocking out all those annoying little LEDs and other lights that can disrupt your sleep, so you always wake up feeling refreshed. Here in Vegas, we often hit 110 degrees or above this time of year. That's 43 degrees Celsius for people almost anywhere else in the world, and that kind of heat really drains you of energy as soon as you leave the house. So it's nice that Mantis Sleep are part of the pro-nap movement, and those cool eye cups do a great job of blocking out that bright summer sunlight so I can cool down and recharge in the middle of the day. Mantis Sleep has a ton of other styles too, like the steam mask, the silk mask, the weighted mask, and even the sound mask, which includes built-in Bluetooth speakers, so no matter what you're looking for, you'll be able to find the perfect mask for you. If you're ready to start sleeping better, follow the link in the description and use my coupon code ZOLDIM10 to get 10% off your order. Thank you again to Mantis Sleep for sponsoring the video, and let's get back to talking about Clair Obscur and the children of the Dessendre family. If Clair Obscur, largely an ensemble piece, can be said to have a main character, I would say that it's Maelle, since she's the only character to be heavily focused on in all three of the game's acts. Maelle is the 16-year-old girl born to parents who were about to gommage and raised in Lumiere by Gustave and his sister. She is also Alicia Dessendre, the youngest member of a powerful family of magical painters responsible for the creation of the world seen in Clair Obscur and many others. Though she doesn't realize it herself until the game's third act, both of these seemingly contradictory statements are simultaneously true. As if that wasn't enough, there are two more versions of Maelle present within the world of the canvas. There's the painted Alicia, created by her mother Aline, and there is the Axon version of Alicia, known as the Reacher, painted by her father Renoir, a lonely hermit of a giant, alone at the world's end. Aline's version of Alicia, the painted Alicia, tells us much about the relationship between the two. Aline resents Alicia and blames her for the death of Verso, and believes that she should be punished for it, should suffer for it. In the world outside of the canvas, which we get only glimpses of, we see that Alicia is scarred by the fire that took her brother's life, with scars across her face, a missing eye, and damaged vocal cords rendering her mute. The version of Alicia her mother created exaggerates these traits. The painted Alicia is far more heavily scarred, and seems to be physically suffering more severely than the real one already is. This is the suffering that Aline believes her daughter should endure as penance for getting her brother killed. The creation of the painted Alicia is an act of cruelty, not only towards the painted Alicia herself, who has been created by a resentful god only to suffer for what someone else did, and accidentally at that, but toward the real Alicia, who would see this copy of herself and know that it is exactly what her mother thinks of her. It's not that the painted Alicia is a completely inaccurate portrayal of the real Alicia. In fact, from what we see, the painted Alicia seems closer in personality to the real Alicia than the Maelle we know is. But in her anger, Aline is unable to see any of her daughter's positive traits and reflect those in her creation. Standing in contrast to this is Renoir's version of his daughter. The Reacher shares many traits with the painted Alicia. It is not an inaccurate or completely idealized version of the real Alicia, but those traits that were negatively exaggerated by Aline are portrayed more positively or with more empathy by Renoir. The Reacher is, like painted Alicia, mute. We know that the Axons are capable of speech because Visage speaks to us, but this is de-emphasized as the Reacher seems above speaking to us, uninterested in it in the same way you would be uninterested in speaking to an ant. Rather than being scarred like Alicia is, the Reacher's face is a giant hole, and most of its body is obscured by a gigantic straw hat that's more like a hut it wears. The aspects of Alicia which Renoir emphasizes are almost completely absent from Aline's version of her. Not physical, but emotional. The Reacher is withdrawn, hiding alone at the edge of the world. This is an aspect of the real Alicia. We hear from Clea in the Endless Tower that while she and Verso would often play in the canvas, Alicia would always be off, withdrawn in her room, doing her own thing. Despite that isolation, the Reacher is not portrayed as a tragic figure. As one journal we can find in the dungeon puts it, the Reacher is alone, but not lonely. Renoir recognizes Alicia as an introvert, and does not think that it is an inherently negative thing. She's simply happier without others than she is with them most of the time. This is how Renoir saw his daughter, the most reclusive member of his family, especially after her brother died. Even the negative connotations of the Reacher being so withdrawn are implied by elements of the dungeon to be viewed by Renoir as the family's failing, not Alicia's. The Neverons within the Reacher dungeon are called Orphelin, and we're told in the game that the Neverons within the Axon dungeons were created by Renoir rather than Alicia's sister Clea, who created the rest. The Orphelin are all children. Specifically, Orphelin is the French word for orphan. They're all orphans who have lost or been abandoned by their parents. I think the reason that Renoir has surrounded the Reacher with orphans is because he sees that following Verso's death, the family have neglected Alicia. She was already the most withdrawn among them, but now Clea is outright cruel to her, and Aline resents her. Even Renoir, who is said by the painted Verso to see Alicia as his favorite child, has neglected her emotional well-being to try to stop his wife from drowning herself in sorrow. They have abandoned their daughter, orphaning her without dying, forcing her to become even more of a hermit than she already was. And yet, despite that hardship, despite that withdrawal, Renoir believes in his daughter. He believes that she might be the best among them, destined for greater things than any of them, if she can only overcome this hardship. This is reflected by the name and theme of the dungeon, the Reacher, a dungeon where you are climbing ever higher and higher, even encountering a friendly Orphelin inventor who is trying to create wings reminiscent of Da Vinci's famous flying machine. As Verso says,
Look around. He just wants you to fly.
Perhaps most interesting, though, is what happens when Maelle enters the hole in the Reacher's face, discovering the true Axon at its core. The true Axon wears a mask rather than emphasizing Alicia's scars like the painted Alicia does, but more importantly, has hair that evokes Cyrene, the Axon representing Aline. This is what Renoir truly sees in Alicia. He sees her mother. Everything he loves about his wife, he sees within his daughter. Perhaps that's part of why the two have had such an explosive falling out. It's often the hardest to get along with the parent you share the most of your personality with. We see similarities between the two throughout the game. Aline herself winds up withdrawing from the world after Verso's death, and both of them share an addiction to the canvas by the end of the game. Renoir's representation of his daughter is no more or less true than Aline's. The difference is that where Aline left out many of her daughter's positive traits, Renoir cannot see his daughter's negative ones, or chooses to excuse them where he does see them. Alicia's withdrawal does not seem healthy. She shares her mother's addictive personality, and she may be responsible for Verso's death after all. But the version of her that Renoir paints ignores all of these facts. So painted Alicia is Aline's perspective of her, and the Reacher is Renoir's, but we have a third constructed, painted version of Alicia to discuss, and it is the most interesting and telling of all: Maelle. Maelle is not Alicia as she truly is. She is the ideal version Alicia sees of herself.
Alicia, as she was meant to be.
In the real world, Alicia is portrayed as timid and withdrawn. Maelle, in contrast to this, is bold and adventurous. Maelle's parents died before she could ever know them, and as a result, Maelle's psyche was never scarred by her parents in the way that Alicia's was. Yes, she grew up as an orphan, taken care of by Gustave and Emma instead of her parents, but she seems to have grown into a stronger and more independent person because of it. This version of Alicia is as much a construction as the painted Alicia and the Reacher are, though. Something the game hammers home in Act 3 is that Maelle is lying to herself about what she really wants and who she really is. For example, at the end of Act 3, when you beat Renoir, she tells Renoir that she can handle being in the painting, that she'll leave right behind him, but unless Verso forces her out, it's implied that, like her mother, she'll remain within the painting for years and years until she dies. I'm not saying that this Maelle personality is a total lie. Clearly, Alicia does contain it within herself to become Maelle, because when she's put into another world without her memories, she does grow into being Maelle. But in the same way that neither Aline's nor Renoir's representations of her tell the full truth, just looking at who Maelle is doesn't tell us everything about who Alicia is either. Maelle is a persona. In the words of Carl Jung, the persona is a complicated system of relations between the individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. Maelle is a mask that Alicia has put on, the idealized version of herself that she wants the world to see. We all have personas, but when you start to believe that the persona is all you are, that's where problems begin. To oversimplify things, in Jungian psychology, the persona is in opposition to the idea of the shadow. The shadow is the thing a person has no wish to be, the part of yourself that you hate, and so the part of yourself that you repress. If you, for example, feel guilt and shame over sex, then your repressed sexual desires are a part of your shadow. Maelle's refusal to acknowledge her burgeoning addiction to the canvas, one which she shares with her mother at the end of the game, repeatedly telling her father that she'll leave the canvas in just a moment, that addictive part of her personality that she refuses to acknowledge is a part of Maelle's shadow. The problem with this repression is that it leads to negative behaviors, like projection or hostility towards others. Or at least that's what Jung believed. I am in no way qualified to say whether any of this is good psychology or not. I'm just here to explain how it relates to our fictional narrative. In the case of Maelle's ending, her refusal to acknowledge her addiction to the canvas and her similarities to her mother leads to her becoming a worse version of herself in the Life to Paint ending. One of the goals of therapy in Jungian psychology is to assimilate your shadow self, to acknowledge the parts of yourself that you hate, accept that they are a part of you, and always will be, and through that acceptance become a more fully realized person. And yes, just to address the elephant in the room, the Persona series is heavily based on elements from Jungian psychology, particularly the persona and the shadow. I mostly bring this up because Persona 5 has been stated to be an influence on Clair Obscur by creative director Guillaume Broche, at least when it comes to the game's battle UI, so it's certainly possible that's where some of these narrative ideas came from as well. Maelle's greatest flaw as a character is that she doesn't want to acknowledge there is any difference between who she is now and who she was as Alicia. She believes that it is as simple as her being Maelle, her own idealized version of herself, which is a delusion.
Alicia.
Actually, I prefer Maelle.
I think I do too. But I'm not really Verso, and you're not really Maelle, are you?
You're not Verso, no. You look and sound just like him, but you're you. I'm still Maelle, though.
When she kills the Painted Alicia at the end of the Reacher dungeon, she is doing the Painted Alicia a kindness, putting her out of her misery. It is what the Painted Alicia wants, and it is the right thing to do. However, when the Painted Verso begins to mourn his sister, Maelle tells him that it's okay, that he's still got her, denying the distinction between the different versions of herself. Obviously, the Painted Verso still having Maelle doesn't change the fact that the Alicia he grew up with, the one he knew, his real sister, just died. Denying him the chance to say goodbye, to try to talk his sister out of her death, is a cruel thing to do. Maelle acknowledges this herself, apologizing to Verso in the camp scene following the dungeon. Maelle does not seem to understand, or chooses not to understand, the difference between all of these reflections of the same person. Between herself as she is now, who she was as Alicia, who the Painted Alicia is, and even who the Reacher is. The delusion that comes to define Maelle is that all of these are the same person. That is one reason why, for the Dessendre family and for Alicia, the life to love ending is better, healthier than the life to paint ending. Leaving the canvas, returning to the real world, is much harder for Alicia to do than remaining within it, because within the canvas she is Maelle, but if she leaves it, she has to cope with the idea that she is actually just Alicia. After all, in the life to love ending, Maelle is standing there with the other expeditioners fading away, too. A construction like any of the other inhabitants of the canvas are. But Maelle is a part of Alicia. Alicia has proven that she has it in herself to be Maelle, and even if she leaves the canvas, she'll be taking Maelle with her. Though it will be hard, she can learn to be the person she wants to be outside of the canvas as well. Not just Maelle, but Maelle and Alicia reconciled into one person, better than either on their own. In the life to love ending, she has the opportunity to be what Renoir sees in her. She has the opportunity to fly. In all of Clair Obscur, the character that it's the hardest to get a grasp on is Clea, the oldest of the Dessendre children. She's introduced very late in the game at the start of Act 3, and most of the information about her is hidden behind side dungeons and super bosses at the end of the game. In the present day of the real world, what little we see of it, Clea seems to have become the de facto leader of the Dessendre family, as her parents have the squabble within the canvas. Clea is not only dedicated to helping her father eject her mother from the canvas, she's also the one who is fighting the family's war against the Writers, the group that started the fire that took Verso's life. We know that she's very resentful of her parents, especially her mother, who she's taken to calling by her first name, Aline. We also know that she's the most skilled painter in the entire Dessendre family, able to paint over the creations of others, which Maelle says in a later scene is something only she is skilled enough to do. The optional dungeon, the Endless Tower, is also, at least partially, a creation of Clea, specifically serving as a game between her and her brother, where they would take turns creating monsters for the other to defeat in battle. There are a painted Clea and an Axon version of Clea present in the game, but unlike Alicia or Verso, it's hard to glean any information about who Clea is, or who her family thinks she is, from either of them. This is because one of the first things Clea did when she entered the canvas after Verso's death, and after her parents began their feud, was to get rid of their representations of her, seemingly out of spite. Most of what we can learn about Clea is buried in the game's backstory, often inferred rather than outright stated. Like her siblings, there was a painted version of Clea created by Aline back in the early pre-Fracture days of Lumiere. We encounter this painted Clea in one of the optional endgame dungeons, the Flying Manor. When we find her though, she is not like the painted Alicia or the painted Verso. Whoever she once was has been overwritten, as she has been painted over by the real Clea, putting her into a half-alive zombie state, seemingly aware but unable to control her actions. Here, in the Flying Manor, the painted Clea has spent the last 67 years absorbing chroma and turning it into nevrons, the same nevrons that have spread out across the world. On the surface, this is a move of utility. Clea doesn't seem to consider the world of the canvas to be real in the way that the rest of her family does, particularly Alicia and Aline. From that perspective, this is a practical decision. It's a way for Clea to help her father eject her mother from the canvas without actually being present inside of it continuously. To paraphrase my favorite Final Fantasy XIV character, if Clea does not consider the people of the canvas to be truly alive, she will not be guilty of murder if she kills them. This is no more unethical than deleting the sim your mom made of you off of the family computer. However, there seems to be something deeper going on here. Maelle speculates that the reason Clea painted over her counterpart is because Clea didn't like her mother's representation of her, that Clea hated whatever she saw in her mother's version of her. It's hard to know what exactly Clea could have seen in her painted doppelganger, though, because we simply don't know much about her. What we do know is that she grew up in Lumiere and fell in love with someone, one of the first expeditioners, a man named Simon. The reason I think Maelle's speculation is correct, that Clea painted over her counterpart out of spite and not just out of utility, is because of what Clea did after painting over her counterpart. Simon can actually be found at the end of an optional dungeon called Renoir's Drafts. At the end of the dungeon, you face Simon as by far the game's most powerful boss. It turns out Simon is the one who killed the Axon version of Clea called the Hauler, who you encounter towards the middle of the game in Old Lumiere. Upon defeating Simon, you can find his journal, which gives his perspective on the events of killing the Hauler and getting trapped in Renoir's Drafts.
My beautiful Clea. What did she do to you? That paintress. She fooled me. She looked so much like you, and I believed her story. I realized too late that she had warped my mind. That she had in fact taken you away. Locked you somewhere I could never reach. And set me on a path to destroy your future. But then I met Aline, who showed me that I could save you. With her help, I descended to the bottom of the monolith, where Aline had sealed him away. The one who brings the gamache. My mind is breaking. My final thoughts are only a few. I despair. But one day, our suffering will end, and we will find our way back to each other. In this life, or another.
So to put all of that together, after the fracture, before or during Expedition Zero's journey, Clea entered the canvas, abducted her painted self, painted over her, and trapped her in the Flying Manor where no one from Lumiere could ever reach her. Then she replaced her counterpart, went to Simon and manipulated him, giving him tremendous power and tricking him into killing the Axon who represented her. Why did she do this? Well, there are reasons for her actions. It's presumably the same reason that Renoir, as the curator, helps you reach the monolith. If Aline is defeated there, then she'll be ejected from the canvas, and Renoir and Clea can destroy it. Getting through the monolith's barrier in the present required the curator to have a tremendous amount of chroma, which could only be sourced from killing an Axon. Therefore, Clea granted an expeditioner enough power to kill an Axon, used the chroma contained within it to allow Simon passage into the monolith, and hoped he'd kill Aline. Renoir needed the chroma from 2 Axons to create a barrier breaker, but Clea is stated by Maelle to be the most skilled painter in the family. That's why Simon, who she empowered, is so much stronger than either Aline or Renoir, stronger than any other enemy in the game by far. So it's easy enough to assume that she was skilled enough to create a similar way to bypass the barrier with only the chroma from 1 Axon. The only reason her plan didn't work is because Aline was able to explain to Simon that Renoir was truly the one trying to destroy the world, and that he was being manipulated by a doppelganger who had replaced his lover. All true, but of course leaving out a lot of details. Aline is just as guilty of manipulating Simon as Clea is. Yet, while everything Clea does here has the plausible deniability of being practical, when you look at what she actually did, it feels very petty. She could have painted over any of Lumiere's people, or probably even made her own creation to paint the Nevrons eternally. She could have empowered any expeditioner, or again, probably made her own creation to fight Aline directly. But she chose to condemn her counterpart's lover to be the one to accidentally destroy his entire world. There were 4 Axons to choose from, and she happened to pick the one that represented her, and what's more, got Simon to do it, unwittingly killing another representation of the woman he loved. These are not the actions of someone who doesn't care about the representations of her that her parents created. These are the actions of someone who is deeply resentful of those representations of her, someone who hates them entirely. Her first priority when she entered the canvas wasn't to stop Aline, it was to destroy these parodies of her. I think Clea was especially resentful of her mother's painted version of her. After all, what Aline did was abandon Clea, abandon her family, to replace them with painted versions she could live with inside of the canvas. When Clea talks about Aline's painted family in the real world during the epilogue chapter, it is with a tone of utter disgust, and she calls her mother Aline, unlike Verso or Alicia do, further emphasizing how disdainful she's become of her mother. We don't know a lot about the painted Clea because of the real Clea's actions, but what we do know seems to imply that painted Clea was happy in a way that the real Clea was not. Personally, I think this is at least partially why she replaced painted Clea. Replacing your counterpart is an action that implies some jealousy. Painted Clea was in a loving relationship, she had her whole family with her, she had the real Clea's mother with her, and most importantly, she didn't seem to have the familial expectations weighing her down. The more abstract version of Clea, the Hauler, is depicted as an Atlas-like figure, holding a city on her back. Nothing Renoir paints is without meaning, and the symbolism here is not subtle. Renoir knows that he and his wife have been unfairly putting the weight of the world, the weight of carrying the family, on his daughter's back, and he feels guilty for it. In the real world, while Renoir and Aline are having their spat inside of the canvas, and while Alicia has withdrawn into isolation, Clea has had no choice but to be the one carrying the family. As the oldest child, she's not only expected to be the most reasonable and responsible one in the family, she's the one left to fight the Dessendre family's war with the writers while the rest of her family fall apart. She hasn't even been given the option to mourn by her family. That's a truly awful thing to do to someone. Despite all of this responsibility and pressure placed upon her by her parents, the game makes it clear that Verso was Aline's favorite child, and Alicia was Renoir's. Playing favorites that way leaves Clea, despite her parents placing so much pressure upon her, as something of an also-ran. It's not hard to understand why she'd be jealous of her painted counterpart, the person she could be without so much pressure and expectation weighing her down. That's not to excuse what Clea does herself in the game. She's very mean to Alicia in every interaction they have, and since the game makes it clear that the people within the canvas are real, are alive, what she does to painted Clea is one of the most evil acts in the entire game, whether she believes it or not. Painted Clea feels like a character out of a Greek tragedy to me. I want to underline how awful her situation is. God is jealous of her, and as punishment for having found love and support from her family, painted Clea is trapped in a living hell, while her lover is manipulated into nearly destroying the world and eventually traps himself in limbo forever. What's more, she's the only member of the painted Dessendre family, aside from Verso, that we never see Maelle gommage, which raises the question of if she actually died a true death in the Flying Manor, or if she's somehow still alive. Personally, my headcanon, though I wouldn't necessarily call it a theory, is that the picto we get at the end of the fight, called Clea's Life, is somehow still her, reduced in form, but still somehow alive and possibly suffering. Where Maelle rejected that there was any difference between these perspectives of herself, Clea rejects the validity of anyone having a perspective on her different from her own. She is who she chooses to be, and if anyone contradicts that, then to hell with them. In moderation, that sort of confidence in who you are is healthy, but Clea utterly rejects any outside perspective on herself and her actions, and in doing so, cannot grow. It's good to know who you are and not let yourself be defined by others, but others can often see things in ourselves we cannot, things that are unhealthy or negative that we should recognize and address. Instead of looking at other perspectives on herself, Clea has chosen to deny that there is any truth to those perspectives. At the end of the game, even in the Life to Love ending where Alicia returns to reality, it's hard to know who Clea is, and if she'll ever grow. We do see her at the memorial for Verso the family holds in that ending, but we also see her walk away from it. Will Clea grow as a person after the credits roll, the way it's implied Alicia and Aline will? The game leaves it ambiguous because we don't know that much about Clea's internal life, and that's how Clea wants it. That brings us to the third Dessendre child we'll be talking about today, the middle child, Verso. The death of Verso, the real-world version of Verso, is what kicks off all of the events of the game. It is his death that causes Aline to retreat into the canvas, painting a replacement family she can live with as a distraction from her grief. It is that retreat that causes Renoir to enter the canvas in an attempt to destroy it, first with the fracture and later the gomage. Because he's dead by the time the game begins, we don't get to spend much time with the original Verso, only a few fleeting encounters with an echo of his soul. The Verso we spend most of the game with is the painted Verso, in the same way that the other painted members of Aline's family were reflections of her perspectives of them. What we know about painted Verso's early life makes it clear that he was Aline's ideal version of him. Painted Verso was a part of Expedition Zero, along with the painted Renoir. The first expedition didn't set out to kill the paintress, they didn't even really know what was going on yet. They were just leaving Lumiere to explore the post-fracture world and search for other survivors. At some point during this expedition, Painted Verso and Renoir learned what their true nature and the true nature of Aline really was, as well as learning of Clea's abduction and replacement of her painted self. Verso goes on to fall in love with a woman named Julie. At some point, Verso was hit by an attack that obliterated half of his body. Obviously this should have killed him, but when Aline painted these replacement members of her family, she made them immortal, so that she would never have to mourn them like she did the original Verso. This means that after a moment, Verso's body regenerated. Julie saw this happen, and despite being in love with Verso, she couldn't help but realize how strange and suspicious this was. From Julie's journal,
Julie, search and rescue. I know what I saw. He died. Fucking died. That attack destroyed half his torso. There's no walking away from that. But when I found him, he was unconscious but whole. His uniform was destroyed, yes, but his chest was merely bruised. He says the blast just missed him and it was chaotic during battle, so I probably misunderstood what I saw. Bullshit! Absolute bloody bullshit! It hurts to think he'd betray us. But nobody ever expects to be betrayed. His mistake, though. He's thinking his charm is sufficient to sell his lies. We'll take him tomorrow night. Claude, Louise, and Dion are no fools. They saw what I saw. We will get answers. And if he is a traitor, then he will share the fate of traitors.
A flashback earlier in the game shows us a glimpse of this encounter. Julie raises her weapon against Verso, and Verso feels that he's left with no choice but to strike her down. Verso's journal relates the aftermath of this.
I miss you. I don't have the right to miss you, but I do. I wish I could talk to you. Tell you. Fuck. I don't know what I would tell you. Just ask that you forgive me. Julie. Forgive me. I'm not a traitor. I'm not. I'm trying to save us all. Papa believes you're Clea's creation, and even if you're not, we can no longer trust you. But I think you just wanted answers. But how could I even explain? You'd have thought I'd gone mad. Doppelgangers. Canvas worlds. Man. But Papa's right. We can't take the risk. Too much is at stake. It had to be done. It had to. Clea already took our sister. If we want to save our family, our world, our people, we can't take any chances. And once we free Mama, she'll bring you back. It won't be forever. I promise. We deserve to live. All of us. we deserve to exist.
Painted Verso was made to be Aline's idealized version of her son. She painted a son who was so dutiful to his parents that he would do anything they told him to. Renoir believed that Julie was a spy painted by Clea, replacing the original Julie the same way Clea herself replaced her painted counterpart in order to undermine the expedition's efforts to free Aline, and so he told his son to kill her. Verso, the obedient child, did. This event seems to be the thing that redefines the painted Verso. This trauma, having to kill the woman he loved, breaks his programming, so to speak, and sets him on a path to become someone different from who he was painted to be. During the events of the game, Painted Verso does not want to be defined as a reflection of someone else. He wants to be seen as his own person. We see this in moments like the aftermath of Maelle gommaging the painted Alicia, or during his confrontation with Aline at the top of the monolith.
This is another trick. She's not Alicia. You are not my Verso.
No. Verso's dead.
I don't consider Painted Verso's assertion that he is his own person to be completely delusional. It is mostly true. Painted Verso has lived many years of life completely different from the original, and even the person he was created to be by Aline was not a one-to-one replication of original Verso. It was Aline's ideal version of him. He has been shaped into a different man, though like most things in this game, there are layers of complexity to that statement to unwrap. The other representation of Verso that we encounter is the axon representing him, Visage. One of the two you need to kill in order to make it to the monolith. Of course, his name, Visage, is a word referring to faces, and the visual motif of the character and his corresponding dungeon is masks, Greek tragedy and comedy masks, as well as a similar mask representing rage, specifically. Is Renoir's depiction of Verso as an axon wearing so many masks meant to imply that Renoir saw his son as duplicitous? Well, there is something there. The painted Verso we know in the game is the most deceitful character in the entire cast. He lies to the party repeatedly, and whenever a lie is exposed, replaces it with yet another lie that's only slightly closer to the truth. But that would mean Visage is a representation of the painted Verso as he is now, which doesn't track logically, since Visage was presumably created before Expedition Zero even set out from Lumiere. Rather, I think the motif of emotion seen in Visage, both the axon and the corresponding dungeon, is Renoir's representation of the painful mix of emotions which remembering his son now brings him and his family. The joy of remembering his son full of life and promise, the agonizing sadness of mourning his death, the rage that has filled his whole family towards the group responsible for the arson that took his life, and towards each other. That's what I think the character of Renoir intended Visage to represent. As a part of the game overall, though, there's another meaning to these masks, one which ties into the overall theme we've been talking about today. Visage himself hints at this meaning with the line,
Masks are not just to obscure, they may also illuminate.
Painted Verso's mask, his persona, the image he wants to project to the world, is that he is a wholly distinct entity from the original Verso. This mask that Painted Verso wears, this identity he keeps asserting, tells us a lot about who he is. He is not comfortable with his own identity. People who are comfortable with who they are don't have to repeatedly tell you who they are. Verso and Alicia contrast each other in many ways. That's why the final ending decision comes down to siding with one or the other. This is one of the ways they contrast each other. Alicia wants to assert that she is Maelle, while the painted Verso wants to assert that he is not Verso. What these masks reveal about both of them, though, is that neither is comfortable in their own skin, simply being who they are. Let's contrast this with the only human character who resists Visage during the fight against him, Ciel. The Mask of Grief cannot control her because, as she says, it is her. Of all the characters in the game, Ciel is the one who is the most in touch with the darkest parts of herself. She's grieved the loss of her husband and her unborn child, and while it very nearly killed her, she came out the other side of it a more complete person. Ciel is the only member of your party who doesn't give you some sort of side quest to finish building your relationship with them, and that's because Ciel has already done her own side quest before the events of the game. This is why Ciel is the only human party member able to resist Visage's influence. Maelle doesn't want to admit who she really is, the painted Verso doesn't want to acknowledge his nature as a reflection of someone else, and even Lune, who seems to be hiding less of herself, repeatedly downplays how important following in her parents' footsteps and finding their remains is to her in her side quest. The other party member he isn't able to control is Minoko. And while that's mostly a sight gag because Minoko is already wearing a mask, it is true that Minoko is the other party member who seems the most in touch with who they are. At no point in the story does Minoko ever seem to be hiding anything about himself, and he doesn't really have to grow or change as a character over the course of the story. His side quest has to do with his counterpart Noko and shedding light on the Jestrel's culture instead. Verso might be the most tragic character in Clair Obscur. There is no happy ending for him. The original Verso never got a chance to live a full life and thrive, and the painted Verso lives a life shaped by tragedy. The best ending he gets is to be granted a chance to die, while the worst ending he gets is to be forced to live a life at the whim of Maelle, who makes him act as though he's her deceased brother, the exact thing he doesn't want. There's no happily ever after for Verso. Neither the original nor the painted will ever get a chance to grow and thrive and live a long and happy life. Clair Obscur uses that melancholy reality with all three of the Dessendre children, but most of all with Verso, to remind us of the importance of not worrying so much about who you are, and to simply be who you are instead. In one of the unknown journals found in the manor, the writer, who is implied to be Renoir, tells one of his children, Verso, that you cannot make art while obscuring your true self.
Art can be a window, and art can be a mirror. And great art is both. Son, you'll never be a true artist if there's always a mask between you and the viewer, especially when the viewer is you.
Visage echoes this sentiment during his boss fight.
People want so badly to know what's behind the mask. Front, back, recto, verso. Great art is both window and mirror, whether it's your mask or theirs. Child, we all need masks, but how you use them,
All of the Dessendre children share a character flaw. They all deny aspects of themselves that they don't want to see. Each of them, in their own way, deny the difference between who they believe themselves to be and who others see them as. Alicia denies that there is any difference between her idealized self, Maelle, and who she truly is. Clea refuses to even acknowledge the perspectives which others have of her. Verso denies that he is a reflection of someone else at all. All of these denials hold some truth, but in absolute, they keep the Dessendre children from being the best versions of themselves. They prevent Alicia from acknowledging her most negative attributes, they prevent Clea from connecting to those around her, and they have brought the painted Verso into a deep depression. That is part of the melancholy of Clair Obscur. Even in the A Life to Love ending, where Maelle leaves the canvas and seems to admit to herself who she truly is, Verso will never get a chance to. Clea, who knows? Clea is so guarded even the semi-omniscient player can't get a real look inside her head. In the Cyrene dungeon, we can encounter an echo of Renoir and hear some of his inner thoughts. This echo ruminates on this idea of identity, which we've been talking about today. It is the piece of dialogue that I think most encapsulates this theme running through the game. He says, "As I get older, I wonder, can you ever truly know someone else? Then again, how many truly know themselves? Is it a blessing to understand your darkest nature, or a curse to which we turn a blind eye? We lie to ourselves all the time, don't we? About things we'd rather not admit or confront. About ourselves. About each other. Then there are the things we genuinely don't see." I think that Clair Obscur providing these multiple character studies, these distinct manifestations of the same core character flaw, serves as a powerful reminder of how fragile identity can be. Who we are and who we perceive ourselves to be are never quite the same thing. It is nearly impossible to fully know yourself. Your perception of yourself and another's perception of you are like two painters creating the same portrait. Both reflections, alike and different in many ways, but neither is truer than the other. Perhaps the truth of the self can never be known. Perhaps it really is ephemeral. All we can do is to strive to better know ourselves. Life is a long journey of self-discovery and self-improvement. I don't think any of us will ever fully be the person we want to present ourselves as. All we can do is keep trying to remove the mask we stare at when we look in the mirror, to understand who we truly are. Before you go, I don't normally do this sort of call to action, but if you haven't seen it yet, please go watch my first video about Clair Obscur, which compares its themes of grief to two comics, The Crow by James O'Barr and Look Back by Tatsuki Fujimoto. I'm really happy with how that video turned out, but it's being absolutely slaughtered by the algorithm. One of my worst performing videos to date, so please consider checking it out if you found this video interesting at all. I have plans for a third Clair Obscur video, but it'll be a few months before that one's out. First, I'll be finishing some other projects, like the Lies of P DLC video I've got coming next month, and a big video which I've got planned for October. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members and Patreon supporters. If you'd like to get updates on what I'm working on before I announce it publicly, access to exclusive videos, and your name in the credits, check out patreon.com/Zuldim or click join down below the video. Sam P. from New Zealand, Schmandolf the Schmay, Kirsten, Captain Swing, Der Freischütz, De Valle, Mouse V, Lieria, Theo D, Noah Phoenix, The Smallest Church in Wienerville, Gassan Abanura, Patrizia Frabetti, Sninkelberg, Ziggy the 31st, Frondi, Yo-Yo Jojo Mojo, Tsai Voafehi, Dan Luther, Jose Armalas, William, Rekka, Alex Smith, Picayune, Hakan Boyam, Pete Lee, Shiny Emptyhead, That's All, Bell Mage, Malachi Murphy, Strix 2031, Chaothic, Pizza Requiem, Dushan Kovacevic, Rules in Place, Raxarox, Mikaru X, Unhealthy Caillou, Sir Darkon, Aurelia 14. Thank you again to today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Until next time, everyone, take care.